This is the story of Esther. All around the world and for thousands of years, our Jewish brothers and sisters have remembered Esther at the end of February in the Feast of Purim, when they all get together and listen to the story of how the Jewish people were saved by the beautiful Queen Esther. Now, if you have a queen, you must have a king. And the king on this occasion is the magnificent King Xerxes, as he liked to call himself. But did he not rule a kingdom which incorporated 127 other kingdoms, stretching from the borders of India all the way to Ethiopia? Now, in the third year of his reign, he moved his capital from Babylon to Susa, and through a 4-month party, everyone was invited to the royal palace. Well, everyone who was anyone. The food was magnificent. The crockery was to die for. The wine flowed in golden goblets. At everyone's elbow, there was a servant who would top up your glass at the slightest indication you wanted some more. Over in the Queen's palace, Queen Vashti was also throwing a party, but it was more decorous and, well, to be perfectly frank, more ladylike. On the final night of the party, King Xerxes got a little bit drunk. He was in the banqueting hall with all the nobles and all the significant people in the kingdom. He looked at all that he had. He said, "Have I not got the best of everything? The best wine, the best palace, the best kingdom, and I've got the best wife. I'll show you." And he summoned one of his servants over, one of the eunuchs, and sent him with a message to Queen Vashti. The eunuch walked across the palace grounds into the Queen's palace and stood politely beside the Queen. "Your Majesty," he said, "the king requests your presence in the dining hall." "Very well," said Queen Vashti. "Tell my husband I will be with him in 5 minutes." "Ahem," said the servant. "The king requests that you wear the royal crown jewels." "Very well," said the Queen. "Tell my husband I'll be with him in 15 minutes. "Ahem," said the eunuch. "Your Majesty, your husband, the king, asks that you come wearing the royal crown jewels and nothing else." There was silence in the Queen's palace, and the more perceptive people felt the temperature drop. A few minutes later, you might have seen the eunuch scurrying out of the Queen's palace, and as he got closer to the great dining hall, getting slower and slower, for you did not want to take bad news to King Xerxes. As the eunuch entered the great hall, there was a buzz of conversation all around the room. But just as he got to the king's side and whispered in his ear, there was one of those lulls in the conversation that you get in any room. And into this silence dropped the eunuch's words. "Your Majesty, Her Majesty the Queen says no." Everyone heard. Everyone looked anywhere except at the king. The king sobered up quickly and ordered another round of drinks, but he was angry. All his nobles had heard that the Queen had said no to him, so in the morning he gathered his 7 advisors, one for each day of the week. 1 day of wisdom a week was all they could manage, but he asked them nonetheless, "What should I do about Queen Vashti?" The advisors all looked at one another, but then the youngest and the boldest stood up and said, "Your Majesty, you must do something, for if word of this gets out, and it will, women all over your kingdoms will believe they can say no to their husbands. A man will not be safe or master in his own household." And so a proclamation was made to go to all the kingdoms, to all the peoples of all the kingdoms, in all the languages of all the peoples of all the kingdoms, carved in tablets of stone, so it is as unchanging as is the law of the Medes and the Persians, that from this day forward a man is to be king in his own house, and that henceforth Queen Vashti will be banished from the royal palace and never again enter the royal presence. And so it was done. But some weeks later, the king realized that he missed Queen Vashti. And so his advisors came up with another plan. We could have a competition, Your Majesty. A competition to be the new queen. All the finest virgins from all around the kingdom could come and you could try them out. The king liked this idea, and so the competition was announced. In the royal palace in Susa, there worked many hundreds of people. One of them was a Jewish man named Mordecai. He was one of Xerxes' bookkeepers. Reliable, diligent. He lived in the city with his niece, Hadassah, meaning myrtle. His brother and wife had died, and so he had adopted her as his own daughter. News came of the competition to be the new queen, and from all over the kingdom, beautiful maidens were sent to the royal palace to be tried out by the king. People talked to Mordecai about how lovely Hadassah was, how beautiful she was, how kind, how nice, and why didn't she go in for the competition? Wouldn't it be lovely to have a local girl as the queen? Mordecai was careful. He did not want this for his niece. Then people began saying to him, everyone knows how lovely Hadassah is. People will think you are not loyal if you do not put her in. So one night, Mordecai sat down with her. He said, my child, you are a child of honorable family. You have nothing in your past to be ashamed of, but if you will take my advice, you will change your name to Esther. And when people ask you who your people are, tell them the truth, that you are an orphan. And then lie and say, but you do not know of what people they were. Esther looked at him and nodded. I understand, she said. I must go to the palace. Maybe the king will love me. Well, said Mordecai, maybe he will. And so the next day he took Esther to the gate of the palace and handed her over into the care of the eunuchs who managed the king's harem. Now, if you are going to present a girl to the king, you don't just take them in off the street and dust them down and send them in. Good heavens, no. There was 12 months of preparation. For the first 6 months, their bodies were bathed daily in oil of myrrh. For the second 6 months, their bodies were bathed in perfume, so that wherever the king chose to lay his hand, sweet aromas would arise. They were also taught skills: how to walk correctly, deportment, polite conversation, how to drink your tea, how to play a musical instrument, recite poetry, and all those skills that a young woman must learn if she is to hold the attention of a man who has a harem to call on. Everyone loved Esther. She was so kind, she was so nice. It shone from her. And on the day she was to be presented to the king, she was asked, what do you want to take with you? Elephants, dancing girls, mountains of sherbet? And she said, I will take what you recommend. So that night she dined with the king, wearing a beautiful gown and a beautiful smile. That night she lay with the king. And in the morning she woke, put on her dress, and went to go and join the other women in the harem. King Xerxes looked up from his bed and said, where are you going, Queen Esther? A proclamation was made throughout all the kingdom. The king cancelled taxes for an entire year so that people might celebrate our new Queen Esther. Mordecai was allowed to visit, not into the women's palace, but to come to the screen, and he and Esther talked daily. Now, Mordecai spent a lot of time in the palace. One day, he was working on one side of a pillar when he heard two men talking on the other side of the pillar. They were two of the king's eunuchs, and they were plotting against the king. They were speaking in their native tongue, assuming that nobody else spoke that language. But Mordecai, he spoke 70 languages. When he heard the plot, he went and told Esther, who told the king, who investigated, found that it was true, and had the men executed. And the deeds that Mordecai had done were recorded in the book of the deeds of the reign of King Xerxes, a book we will come back to later.